Montari, Enkelman half-saved it, but it's turned in. Kanu has got it this time. It's Pompey chimes of Wembley joy. His famous old club have at last another triumph to celebrate, and Harry Redknapp, in his first experience of a major occasion, is a Wembley winner.
Takeover has been agreed. Portsmouth are the new Chelsea.
No one had any reason to doubt that he wasn't a multi-billionaire.
The wages the players were getting were extortionate.
The first amount was 2 million, and before I knew it, it snowballed to 17.
Nobody else would have touched us with a barge pole. We were toxic.
Why has somebody got to do it? Why can't you do it? Why can't we do it?
It was time to call a halt to a dictatorial ownership.
This is going to be the one time where we could actually end up putting Portsmouth Football Club into the hands of the people that love it most, the fans.
If you have drive, enthusiasm, talent, a belief in what you're doing, and incurable optimism, there's nothing that can't be done.
I'm delighted to be here at Fratton Park today for the final interview we've got to tell the inside story of our club, the movie. And I've got Tony Brown, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Portsmouth Football Club now, who's going to hopefully give us an interesting insight into how community ownership worked at Portsmouth Football Club. But I think to begin with, Tony, your accent tells me you're not from around here. So I think my first question is, are you red or blue?
Very blue, so it was a good fit to come to Pompey.
Indeed, I think that's the right answer. So tell us a bit about you born from Liverpool. So how did you become an Evertonian?
Grew up on the edge of Liverpool. My dad was a big fan of Everton, and I went to my first game in 1971. Alan Ball scored the winner against Newcastle. 30th of October 1971, quite a good goal actually, in his white boots. And we had a black and white TV, and I was already obsessed, but I can remember that day as if it was yesterday because of the colour, the green of the grass, the blue of the stadium, the black and white of Newcastle, and Alan Ball's red hair.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that was actually, I'll get this one in, that was just before Everton played Southampton a couple of weeks later and beat them 8-0. So were you at that game?
I was a bit sad to have missed that one.
Indeed, yeah. No,
in those days, games were rationed.
Indeed. Well, that one's etched on my memory as a young Pompey fan as well.
I think that was in the snow.
Yeah, I think it was. But so obviously, how did your career kind of develop? Obviously, you've ended up working in football, but what was your career path into that?
By chance, really. I mean, I was a massive Everton fan. Travelled the country when I was at Sheffield Polytechnic, watching Everton in the glory days of the mid-80s, winning the league and Cup Winners' Cup and FA Cup. And I ended up in London straight from Sheffield. Did a chartered accountancy, did that for 4 years, qualified as an accountant. Was basically just working as a finance director in London, and then out of the blue got a role with a big entertainment theatre group, Bill Kenwright, and he just bought a Premier League football club, which was my team, Everton. And that's how I got in, really. And I worked with Bill, obviously doing the theatre, during the week, going to shows, and then more and more over the 4 years I got involved in the football. Big stuff, really, rather than the nitty-gritty, but I was really involved in the football club for 4 or 5 years.
Okay, so what sort of period of time would that have been?
I started with Bill in 2000, and I left in 2004, the end of 2004, and then my next role was at Cardiff City working on their new stadium project.
All right, okay, and so basically that stadium that we now know in Cardiff, you were involved in that, so that must have been an interesting project.
It was, because it was a bit against the odds, because Sam Amman had won a planning permission with one council, Lib Dem council. There was a different council in place. I can remember going there and not really thinking we'd be able to pull it off. all kinds of cash flow issues, very similar situation to what happened at Portsmouth a bit later. And it came a bit full circle because my goal was really to work on the stadium and get all the planning and approval from the local council passed, which is where I managed in 2008, and one of my last game for Portsmouth, for Cardiff, was against Portsmouth in the 2008 Cup final.
Well, that's quite an interesting kind of thing, really, because obviously you were working in the Premier League Championship football circles during the time where Portsmouth were riding high. We reached the FA Cup final. So as an outsider looking in on the Portsmouth situation, I mean, what did you have any thoughts on it?
I think it's the same as everything. I think at the end of the day, if investors are paying the bills and paying the wages at the end of each month, everything is fine. You know, most, you know, even in today's football, the Premier League as a cumulative total loses something like £250 million a year, which is ironic given the fact that everyone thinks it's a wealthy league. So when you become totally dependent on investment from owners, everything's fine as long as they pay the bills, but you've got to realise as a fan, and you know that you can't always rely on that indefinitely.
And I mean, what was there any kind of like, you know, gossip or whispers in the football world at that time about the Portsmouth situation, or? I
think I knew on the FA Cup final day when I was at Cardiff that even though we'd been on a big journey at Cardiff, we had no money. It was really against the odds that we managed to get the stadium redesigned from, I think Samamam had a 60,000 capacity, and we ended up with 28,000 on the new stadium. And we were a championship club, you know, Pompey were in the Premier League, but I knew at that stage that it was likely that, you know, the first signs were coming out that maybe the ownership at Pompey didn't have the wherewithal to continue trading as they were.
So it's very much a kind of, the high water mark for Portsmouth in lots of ways in that way. So when you left Cardiff, where did you go to then?
I went to work in sports merchandising for 3 years, working for a company who had been connected to Cardiff. They had football brands and rugby brands, and I was still involved in football because I was working doing deals with different clubs. We did quite a lot of deals with Leicester City. I did a deal with, and then after that, I came back into football with Blackburn Rovers. They'd just been taken over and gone through a pretty sorry stage, and really that's where I got involved in dealing with agents and negotiation and transfers, and basically trying to be a solid person back, acting in the best interest of Blackburn when really they'd been taken to the cleaners a bit.
And obviously, you know, around that time, Portsmouth were going through their kind of second phase of ownership troubles. You know, we had the likes of Antonov coming in and ended up being extradited back to Lithuania in that regards. So clearly the clouds were gathering at Portsmouth again, and the idea of community ownership is in the ether. How did you get involved in the project?
It was a bit strange, really, because I'd known Trevor Birch from football for a long time, and I actually introduced Mark Catlin to Trevor Birch. I got to know Mark when I was at Blackburn. I think Mark was at Bury, and he was keen to get involved in Pompey. So I made the introduction. The three of us had a coffee in London, and it was ironic that Mark then went off to Pompey. I helped a friend out from Cardiff for a few months down at Plymouth, which was actually a valuable experience for me in terms of League Two financing. And then after I'd finished at Plymouth, the deal being done at Pompey, and Trevor and Mark asked me to come back and meet the guys. I think I met Ian McInnes down here, and the team, and Chris and John in London, and I joined the journey. Indeed,
and in actual fact, I mean, you've been here kind of 6-7 years now in that regard. So this is probably the football club you've been longest at, isn't it?
It is, and you know, it's been a hell of a journey in the last 7 years. Again, it doesn't really feel like there's ever been a stage when we've had it easy. Obviously, this year's been difficult with the pandemic and all the different challenges that's presented.
So take us back then. So you walk into the office, it's day one, the books and the paperwork's put on your desk. What's your reaction?
Oh my God, what have I done? I think I knew it was going to be difficult because I knew there was a lot of cynicism in football quarters and the authorities. You know, I knew some people at the Football League and they didn't really think that the new ownership structure would last too long at Pompey. And it was a real challenge because there was loads of enthusiasm, loads of good things to work on, but we were having to try and rebuild trust in the football community, rebuild trust in the local suppliers who'd been let down by 2 administrations in 18 months. So yeah, it was a full-on process.
And that first summer where obviously we're getting the first squad together, I mean what were some of the challenges around that situation?
It was just, you know, I got involved in the transfers probably after a year. The first year for me was really putting in basic foundations in terms of the banking facilities and all the standard things that we were really starting from new. And it, you know, if you think about it, most new companies when they start up very slowly, and you don't have the pressure of matches and of 18,000 fans. And we didn't have that time. We had to sort of hit the ground running, and it was sort of expected that we would just pick up where we left off. But of course, we didn't want to pick up where we left off because that was, you know, we wanted to try and do it in a new way.
And that first season obviously was a very challenging season under community ownership, and I think, you know, we were not that far off being relegated to the National League. I mean, what kind of impact did that have on operating the business, and also kind of like in terms of how you saw the future panning out?
I think we were trying to do 2 things. We were trying to put in the off-pitch foundations to enable the club to have sustainable growth going forward, and at the same time you're running a football club in terms of on the pitch being successful. And again, it's probably no surprise looking back that we didn't hit the ground running as we wanted to, because we were starting from scratch, and you forget that sometimes in football it takes a long time to build up. And in a way, it presented an opportunity that I think I was able to sort of exploit, because I saw at the end of that first season that we had survived. There was the real tangible prospect of us being relegated to the National League, and I was able to sort out a lot of debt that was going to hang over the club for the next 3 or 4 years. And I did something like, I think I did 28 settlement agreements with ex-players, with ex-clubs. And by September 2014, we were able to say we're a debt-free club, which for me meant we could be more clear in terms of our forecasting. But I think for the fans, it was final sort of validation that we were on solid grounds to move forward. And I was a bit shocked actually by the reaction by a lot of people, because I could tell it really meant a lot given all that had gone on before.
I mean, to a certain extent, I think that's the point at which Portsmouth Football Club is beginning to get his head above the surface of the water again, isn't it? I suppose to give it that sort of analogy that we're on the upward swing from that point.
Yeah, but you know, it was always about trying to put in proper foundations, trying to manage our finances in a way where we could be sustainable. We've demonstrated that. We've had 7 years of break-even financial results, which I think, you know, I wouldn't have expected 7 years ago. And obviously it's going to be a challenge to meet it this year with COVID. But the main point was trying to put in the right principles to move forward in whatever way we did. And then obviously you've got the separate issue of trying to be successful on the pitch, which is a different art form in itself.
And it was around this sort of time that the idea of doing the Our Club, the movie film, began to percolate around. I mean, when were you first aware that there was the potential of having a film in the offing, and what was your reaction to it?
I think it makes sense because it was a special coming together. What I really like about what happened at Pompey is it was all the fans. It was the high net worths in the corporate hospitality boxes, and it was the guys down the pub sitting in these seats in the front end. And I think everyone recognised it was about doing the right thing for Pompey as a club to go forward, and that's what made it so special. You know, there was a real, you know, special thing. What, you know, I mentioned my dad taking me to a match at Goodison, Alan Ball, 71, and me being obsessed. But I remember taking my dad down to Fratton Park, mum and dad. I think it was November 2015. We had Paul Cook as the new manager, and, you know, I remember he was just, you know, so impressed by the atmosphere, you know, and obviously it does, you know, the South Stand reminds me very much of Goodison. It was the same architect, and I just remember, you know, my dad really getting the passion for the city, because there is a similarity towards Portsmouth and Liverpool in terms of the naval and maritime sort of connections. And I just think the overall issue with Pompey was that it, you know, the key mark of difference was it was the whole fan base coming together.
And I mean, it's quite interesting, you know, kind of we're now on the upswing. Paul Cook's in charge. I mean, what do you think Cookie brought to the mix?
I think he was a good football manager. I think whatever way you dress it up, he had a good eye for a player, and, you know, players like playing for him, and he really did bring a really good football style. No one can deny the excitement of those first few months and the new style of football, and he's really passionate, as we all know, but, you know, he's a really good football manager, and that was proven by the job he did at Wigan.
And obviously in that first season we ended up just dipping out on the automatics, and we ended up in the playoffs, and it was against Plymouth in the semi-finals. I mean, that was quite a key point in the film. What are your memories of that playoff semi-final? Because you've got a professional connection with Argyle as well.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Argyle, and again, they were in a precarious position, and I went in to try and sort out their finances, which luckily worked out, and they're on the upward curve. I just remember on the day trying to get Paul Cook to calm down, and I can remember saying to Paul, whatever happens, just make sure, you know, you don't get involved. You stay out on the touchline for 90 minutes and you don't get yourself sent off. So when he came to join all the directors after 10 minutes, just in front of the director's box after he'd had his red card, I nearly said, told you so. Actually, that one match is my most memorable Fratton Park atmosphere. It was a Thursday night, it was a bit different. When McNulty scored in the end down here, I couldn't believe the atmosphere. It was absolutely, you know, it was just magnificent, the atmosphere that night.
Yeah, no, to be honest, that game reminded me of the AC Milan game in lots of ways. It was that real kind of fervour behind it.
You know, there's been some real special nights, and, you know, obviously we didn't win that night, but that was the night that, you know, really, you know, it's one of the all-time, you know, if I think of Everton in terms of the Wimbledon game when we stayed up, and Bayern Munich in the semi-final in 85, that, even though we didn't win, it was the game that, you know, was the most special atmosphere I've encountered at Fratton Park.
And the following season, of course, you know, I don't want to give away too much in the film, but Pompey win the league on the last day of the season. I mean, what are your memories of that run-in at the end of the season?
I think what was really good about that period was we struggled in March. I think we lost a crew. There was a lot of frustration among the fan base. We went through the motions. We didn't react to the fan pressure that night, and then for some reason we went on the Tuesday night away to Crawley. The fans had a new song, and you just knew we were going to do it, and we played really well and won. And then, you know, I think when we won at Colchester, I really knew in my heart that we were on a, there was too much momentum to stop us, and there was too much confidence flooding through the team that we would get over the line.
And we picked Argyle on the last day of the season, that was quite an amazing day in itself, wasn't it?
Well, it's always nice to get one over James Brent.
Indeed, there we are. And obviously around that time as well, we've got this subplot going on, because at that time Michael was over. There was talk of the Tornante takeover. We had the meeting in the Guild Hall. I mean, at that point, were you A, surprised that fan ownership had gone so far and lasted so long, and B, what was your kind of like feeling about what the club should do at that point?
I think fan ownership can work as long as there's a level playing field for all the other clubs. Our issue really was about Fratton Park as much as being successful in moving the club forward, because while it's a fantastic old stadium, it is an old stadium that, with health and safety rules, requires a lot of investment, and we had the benefit of an escrow account of £3 million that had enabled us to look after the stadium for 4 years. That had run out of money, and while we were operationally break even, it was unlikely that would happen year on and year. You certainly couldn't guarantee that, and so it would require more investment from the fan ownership. It felt a natural time for that passing of the baton.
Okay, and just one sort of final question. I mean, obviously you had 6 years here at Portsmouth now. I mean, what would you say professionally is your best, proudest achievement here?
I think making Pompey, restoring the faith and foundations across football circles and financial circles that Pompey's a well-run club. We put in proper foundations. We've done things for the right reasons of the future growth of the football club.
Tony Brown, thank you.
Thanks, Colin.